Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Today's session is Organizational Trust and Honesty, a fireside chat with Mark Fagan and Francis Frei. Professors Frei and Fagan are experts on building organizational trust, managing operations, and designing for excellence strategy. With overlapping experience in the transportation sector, including countless years of research, consulting, and leadership positions, these two understand why trust, honesty, and the roles each play in developing strategies are so important within an organization. And now, without further ado, let's let Mark and Francis discuss organizational trust and honesty. Mark, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for the kind introductions. Francis, it's so nice to see you. I'm really looking forward to exchanging ideas with you about building trust. I know this is a topic you've been working on for a number of years now, and you seem to have synthesized the learnings you have into a triangle for trust building. What led you to the triangle, and what are its components?
Yeah, and it's great to see you, Mark. Thank you for the invitation. So we made a big breakthrough when we realized that the reason that people were getting such a small return on their trust efforts, whether it was to build it or to rebuild it, was that trust wasn't a monolithic thing. It actually has, what we have learned, 3 component parts. And because it's 3 component parts, we use a triangle. If it had 4 component parts, oh my goodness, it would be a quadrangle in a hurry. So that's the pragmatism I guess, and I like shapes. And we found that the 3 component parts were that I'm more likely to earn your trust if you get the sense that it's the real me with a rigorous plan, and that I'm centered on you. And the language we use there is authenticity, logic, and empathy. And in all of our work with individuals and organizations, every time we see trust broken, for example, we can always, I'm going to say always, trace it back to one of those 3. And it's important to know which one of the 3 is, because the prescriptions are super different for each one.
So let me pick up on this idea of prescriptions.
Yeah.
What's your prescription for empathy? It's a very commonly used word. I can think about it, but make it tangible.
Yeah. So the way I think that the world used to think about empathy, and I think we've done some updating recently, is that some version of I'll walk a mile in your shoes. But the truth is, Mark, I can't walk a mile in your shoes. I'm not a white man. I'm not like, I could try as I like. It's going to take a very long time. So the real breakthrough came when we understood that I can certainly center on you. And if I center on you, then I can be in it for you. And so if it's the empathy is that I'm in it for you, the way we pragmatically think about it is I'm centered on you. So I'm going to learn by centering on you. Hopefully I'm going to learn things that I can then use to make the whole world better, not just you. But so empathy to me is that we are centered on someone else. And when we're in someone else's presence, we're not self-centric, we're other-centric. And when I'm in your presence, I am super present to your needs.
That's really good. Are there any particular areas that your tricks of the trade you've found to make yourself more centered towards the person you're
and we learned a lot of these with working with a beautiful neurodiverse community where empathy had to be taught like step by step by step. So small tricks. If I'm talking to you and I have my shoulders and eyes oriented towards you, your experience of my empathy will go up and my experience of my empathy for you will go up. That's one. The other one is curious inquiry. If I ask you a question that I'm genuinely curious about, your experience of my empathy will go up and my experience of my empathy. So we joke that it's shoulders, eyes, and question marks.
I like that. The second component of the triangle is this idea of logic. And, when I think of logic, being an operations management person, as you are, what goes to my mind is kind of processes, structure, building strategy in. When you refer to it in particular with regard to the kind of restoration or the shoring up of trust, How do you think about logic? How do you, again, operationalize it?
Yeah, well, I have a very similar view, of course. It's does it all, are all the pieces in its place? And so there's two things that can happen. When all the pieces are in its place, I still may communicate it to you in a way where you don't actually sense that the pieces are in the place. So I might have good structural logic, but I'll lose you in the communication. That will be received to you as you'll be skeptical of my logic, but I shouldn't do any more work about getting the pieces in the right place. They're in the right place. That case, I have to work on the communication of it. So I think that there's either a style problem with logic or a substance. Substance, to your point, is let's get the pieces in place.
Right.
But style, which happens a great deal, pieces are in place, but my communication style is such that you lost it. And trust is always in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely. You know, when you talk about that, it makes me think a little bit. In my lobbying class, I introduced the students to Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences and the various ways in which people learn. And so there are those who are visual learners, auditory learners, tactical learners, and the like. And boy, getting that and understanding who you're talking to and finding the right way of communicating. And sometimes it's multiple forms. I'll speak for myself. If you're talking to me, you know, I'm good as a listener. I'm also good when you give me a little bit of anchoring with some text to go with it or some visuals. So I think that's really your point about how we communicate is one, don't just, you know, be boxed in to, well, I just have to have this communication with you. Think a little more about tying it to the empathy. How will that person understand what I'm saying and build off it?
Beautiful.
So let me then turn to the one that I find a little more perplexing.
Sure.
And that is this idea of authenticity.
Oh, yeah, this is the hardest one.
It's just, I think about it and I think about myself, you know, and I'm sure you face the same as a consultant. When you go into an organization, there's a certain degree that you kind of want to fit in because if you do, you think your message is going to resonate more, but maybe that isn't necessarily the right answer. So explain if you wouldn't mind to me so I can learn a little more about this idea of what does it mean to be authentic, and for those like me who aren't so sure about it, how do I do it? How do I get there from here?
Yeah, and I'll just start by saying fitting in is a very dangerous, slippery slope. It sounds so good and so benign, and it's the cause of a lot of bias in the world. So I'm going to park that one to the side, and I'm going to say this: like, how do we do it? So the first thing is that if I am not authentic, that is, if I try to be someone I'm not. So let's say fitting in requires me to be aggressive, and I'm not very aggressive. Mm-hmm. I will be terrible at being aggressive. People will realize they just will sense something's off and they won't trust me. So I won't actually be very good at being anyone but myself. So that's the first part of it. But the second part, what usually happens is that, you know, I'm looking around the room. I have the courage to be me, looking around the room, but it doesn't seem like this is a great place to be me. So I'm just going to reserve a lot more of me. So much of authenticity, when people are doubting our authenticity, it's because we're not giving them enough to see. We're really reserving back. So I'm a queer faculty member at the Harvard Business School. I'm the only queer faculty member tenured at the Harvard Business School. I could be forgiven in some instances during some conversations where I'm just going to go ahead and hold back in this instance. Mm-hmm. Not saying it's good for the school, but sometimes it's good for me. And so I think out of self-protective instincts, we sometimes hold back our authenticity. So that's one part of it. It's also authenticity is co-produced because the people in that very room that I'm holding back from, they have to do so little to suggest that it's a really good idea for me to bring myself forward. So when it's a lonely sport and I'm just holding back and nobody notices, I'm just holding back. But oh my gosh, the barest of invitations that you're welcome, like your point of view is welcome. It's actually celebrated. In fact, you're the only one with the lived experience in the room. Please, please, please come in. So I think that authenticity is co-produced by everyone in the room. I have to do it, and the rest of the room has to make sure it's a really good idea to do it. And I think therein lies the complexity of it.
I want to pick up on this idea of co-production and take it to a slightly different place.
Sure.
Both you and Amy Edmondson at the business school have talked a lot about psychological safety. And it seems like there may be some co-production happening between the authenticity and creating an environment where there is psychological safety. So, when you think about how you've used the concept of psychological safety, can you make it again tangible? How do you think about that? And am I correct that there is that linkage between?
You are. No, and it's really good. And it goes back to, so Amy Edmondson's dissertation is where she discovered psychological safety. My dissertation was on co-production. So you actually are going back to our roots in really beautiful ways. I've never been asked the question in this way either. And I think it is there because, Amy lets us know like how important it is for us to speak up when we see something, and there has to be enough safety so that we speak up when we're saying it. And implicit is there has to be enough safety. So I have to have the courage to speak up, and the environment has to be conducive. So her first research on it, which I think was maybe the most important research, was in surgical rooms, in operating rooms, when doctors made it safe for nurses to speak up and say, we left a knife in the patient. Fewer people died. And when doctors didn't make it safe, and those environments where no, don't say anything, you can, more people died. And so it's the nurse having the courage and the doctor setting the conditions. And so I think it is, and Amy and I are very close colleagues and friends. And I think it's because of this compliment that, well, we're awesome people, but I think it's also the compliment that comes up, which is why our work intersects so much.
That's great. That's great. When you describe the trust building in conjunction with these three components, you have a very interesting term about how solid it is. Talk about wobbles.
Yeah. So,
what's the genesis of a wobble, and how should we think about it?
Yeah. So, what I invite people to do is interrogate the most recent time when they didn't earn as much trust as they intended, so that it's a real example, and thus we had a skeptic, and ask ourselves, what did the skeptic doubt about us? What was unsteady in the eyes of the skeptic? Did they doubt our logic? Is that why they ultimately didn't trust us? Did they doubt our empathy, our authenticity? A skeptic's doubt is what we call wobble. So the most recent time I lost trust, I didn't earn it. It's actually with my senior colleagues. All of my senior colleagues knew it was the real me. And they saw my logic, but they doubted that I really was centered on them. And the truth is, I was 100% centered on junior faculty. And I forgot to, so they didn't, no amount of authenticity or logic was going to matter. They doubted my empathy. So I had an empathy wobble. The reason Ann and I use the phrase wobble is because it's meant to communicate a very temporary condition. We can overcome a wobble just like right away. So usually we think trust is this Fabergé egg. And if you ever drop it, it's going to go into a million pieces, never to be rebuilt again. We want to disabuse that idea. Trust is super resilient. Of course, you're going to lose trust. We want to do it less often, but of course you are, and it can be rebuilt. And there are some things that wobble along the way.
I'll extend this idea of wobble back to our operations management roots. And when I read Carl Albrecht's Moments of Truth, it really strikes me that you can see the wobble in it. The idea is, of course, that in every organization, any interaction that a customer or a service recipient in the public sector or the private sector receives from that organization helps form their perspective and opinion on the organization, whether it's the quality of the product or, as we're discussing, the trust. And one of the things that's always intrigued me about that is when he lists off how do you make sure your moments of truth are successful, in addition to you got to get the basics down pat and kind of the traditional things we talk about in our strategy work. He's got one in there where it's about how skillfully you can recover when the error takes place.
Yeah.
And his argument is no matter how good you are, you're going to have lapses. And I think you're just pointing that out.
Yeah.
And the resilience of an organization is partly a function of how well they respond to it.
Yeah.
And, when I think of the classic that we all go to is Tylenol and J&J in the 1980s, where for those who aren't as familiar, there was a situation where bottles of Tylenol were being tainted, and the company immediately took action. Recalled 35 million bottles of Tylenol, accepted responsibility, even though it ultimately didn't really hold accountability. And it really has served, at least to my thinking, as a real anchor for that. But there are lots of examples more recently.
Many.
One that comes to mind, and then I'm going to ask if you have some
Sure.
examples, is JetBlue. So here in Boston, JetBlue is somewhat our hometown team.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of you who may have been traveling, I believe it was in 2015, for February vacation, there was a Valentine's Day blizzard, and it turned into a disaster. And one of the actions that was taken relatively quickly was the CEO and senior leadership, the CEO at the time was the founder, created a Bill of Rights for travelers. And it talked about, well, you know what? If we make you wait for a flight too long, we're going to compensate you. If we keep you on the ground in the plane too long, we're going to compensate you. And if you arrive early and you wait a long time, we're going to compensate you. And it, I think, is emblematic of how you can take a real mess and turn it around. And what really intrigues me and excites me about that particular example is we are now 6 years later, and they still have a Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
It's been altered, it's been modified, and to some extent, I think about it as consistency as a component of how we build trust. But I'm curious to hear from your experience, and my goodness, you've been all over the place. Where do you see examples where people have faltered, but figured out how to kind of get back on track?
Yeah. Well, I'll say every place where people have tried, they've been successful. By tried, meaning they are educated as they try. That is, I've never seen a mountain too high that you can't fix it. Now, I've seen many people have no desire to change, and then that's why it doesn't. So I think when I went to Uber in 2017, it had lost trust with every one of its stakeholders. Within 9 months, we had rebuilt that trust. You can open up the newspaper today and you'll see some of the biggest brands in the world will have lost trust with their stakeholders. And at those moments in time, people were calling for them to go away. They're calling for them to be broken up. And if they don't address trust, those arguments gain steam. But every one of them, if you think about it, for any one of them, you're going to see it's either an authenticity, logic, or empathy problem. And if you go back to the source, we would be able to overcome it. So what I like about what JetBlue did in your example is that they made their logic transparent. So by having that Bill of Rights, and that's particularly true today, it's not enough to say, you know what, it's a black box of logic, but we got this. We need enough of a peek inside so that we can see for ourselves. And so they've had beautiful, transparent logic. And the other thing I like about it is it's lasted into the absence of the founder. He's no longer even there, but his ideas maintain. And that's like leadership to us is about making others better as a result of our presence in a way that lasts into our absence. And that is a beautiful artifact of leadership.
Absolutely. You mentioned the time you spent at Uber. I'm curious. I mean, clearly, when you went, it was, I'm sure, quite a challenge. The environment was, I'll just
very bad.
All right, I'll go with your very bad.
It was very bad.
When you think about the change that you were able to make, I mean, we all, no matter where you are, change management is something you have to figure out how to do.
Yeah.
Whether you're in a strategy group, an operational group, delivering government services, doesn't matter. We all need that change management. I'm curious, in an organization like Uber, which was a rapidly growing, in many ways very successful, but in many other ways very challenged organization, but it had a very distinct culture at the time you arrived. How did you work through kind of the change management process as you identified opportunities for where we need to change? How'd you get people to come on the journey with you?
Yeah. So what I have found is that there's three necessary things that are needed for change management to work. I'll describe them as the second and the third, and then the first, just because the pedagogy is easier. So if there's not a clear and a compelling change mandate, it's going to be pushing a rock up a hill. So like, what is the clear reason we have to change? And is it compelling? And I mean, can you like summarize it on one sheet of paper without a lot of words? Mm-hmm. Uber was on the front page of every newspaper. Uber, like there was a clear and compelling reason that organization had to change. Like that's, in fact, I got called because of that. I said, no way am I going to come out there because of that. And then people convinced me that they were really good people there. And so I went to see for myself. So, but the first thing is that we need a clear and compelling change mandate. Usually it happens with an externality or something internally ends up on the front page of the newspaper. It needn't, but that's common. Mm-hmm. We then need a rigorous way forward. Like, here's our clear, compelling. So what's the rigorous? And our way forward must simultaneously be optimistic. Rigor without optimism, I'm afraid nobody will follow. Optimism without rigor, people will become cynical in a second. Mm-hmm. So we need a clear and compelling change mandate and a rigorous and optimistic way forward. If I go back to now, what's step one before all of this? We have to honor the past. There is no way that all of the past should be condemned, neither the people that were here nor the beautiful things that occurred while they were here. There are targeted parts that have to change. That's the clear and compelling change mandate. I see a lot of people come in to change and they don't honor the past, which means they have dishonored every single person that was there up until that day. And when people say change is hard, it's really hard when you dishonor everything that came before you. But when we honor the past, reveal the clear and compelling change mandate, so nobody has to wonder why now? Because you know what? I'd much rather wait a while. Like, why now? And then the way forward has to be super clever and creative and rigorous and optimistic. So when I got to Uber, the clear and compelling change mandate was there. We had to come up with the rigorous and optimistic way forward. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of people who wanted us to just throw the past under the bus. So there were a few things that I was insistent on. One is to understand the past well enough to understand the glory of the past. I mean, this was a place that was on its way to making driving possible for women in Saudi Arabia. It already, in my mind, was liberating grandmothers around the world. Like my mother, who is a grandmother, she is like fiercely independent. And she at the time was driving her last car. She was going to have to be super reliant on neighbors or family. That would have been a deterioration in life. And it really would have put it in balance. Uber, she was able to maintain her liberty. So when we honor the past and we see the dignity and the innovation and so was important for us to do that. And the people that were there, we have the clear and compelling change mandate. And so it was up to us to figure out the rigorous and optimistic way forward. And I'll tell you, that part was hard. Like, that was to look around and figure it out. So I had to go talk with a lot of people and see. And here, I'll give you one example of what we found. Every breakdown that we saw, and we through an anonymous hotline, I think we got 1,000 complaints. 999-ish had to do with an interaction with someone's manager. There were 3,000 managers of the 13,000 employees at Uber. There were either 3,000 bad people, or we were systematically not setting managers up for success. Mm-hmm. It took less than a week to test that hypothesis. And it turned out that we were people got hired in their first job. Mm-hmm. 5 minutes later, because of hypergrowth, they were promoted to manager with no training. 5 minutes after that, promoted to a manager of manager. So we had systematically been putting people in jobs that they did not know how to do. Well, we know how to fix that. A massive influx of executive education can help there. So there were 3 or 4 things that it turned out to do. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't any bad people, but of the 13,000, I think we separated from 20 in June of 2017, and we completely turned around the culture in 9 months. And my experience in organizations is that 9 months, when people say, how long does it take to change a culture? For an organization of substance, this was like global organization, I think it takes about 9 months. Now, having said that, many organizations choose to spread those 9 months over 5 years. Mm-hmm. I don't recommend it. Mm-hmm. I recommend condensing it as much as possible, because it's really hard to slow it down and handle the mixed messages. But it's about 9 months of work.
Wow, very interesting. One of the challenges that I'm seeing organizations face is maintaining trust in a fake news world. We're increasingly seeing polarization of views. We're increasingly operating in echo chambers. And so what is truth becomes a lot more challenging, especially if you have a diverse set of stakeholders that you're trying to communicate with. From the kind of work that you've been seeing and doing, how do we grapple with that?
It's such a great question.
It's such a daunting issue.
Yeah. So the first thing I would do is say, if we were in an organization, we would be able to go to the data and look at the data, and it would be uncontroversial. We have 180 people working here. If somebody said, nope, it's 200, and somebody else said, nope, it's 160, we can count, right? Like we have these sales. So we can get a shared basis of understanding within an organization. That makes this job a lot easier. If we don't have a shared basis of understanding, and it's your credibility of interpreting it and my credibility of interpreting it, well, the problem is that the way in which you interpret it has an eye towards clicks and likes and reading. There's like a revenue associated with it. And the way that I do it, so our sources of the data have really perverse incentives on both sides. It's really perverse. And if you start listening, you're like, you're not giving me the source of the data. You're giving me an editorialized, perhaps slightly sensationalized version of the data. If everyone is incented to give an editorialized, sensationalized view of the data, well, if it was an organization, it would never be able to make any progress. We used to have news stations that used to do this. There's not very many that do it well anymore. So I think we need, and this is where I think universities can play a very big part, but without a shared understanding of the data, it is really hard to make progress. So all of the resources we can to get a shared understanding of reality without sensationalism and without editorializing, I think is the necessary first step.
There's an interesting dichotomy, I think. On one hand, we've got the organization itself with its fact set. And so if employees are burnishing their reports to look good, that is something you can work through factually. The piece that I'm intrigued with is the customer. And whether that customer is an end customer or over on this side of the river, typically a constituent who's receiving a public service, the perspective there, I think, is in many ways shaped by the world around that individual. Have you seen any strategies for kind of enabling the customer to better get a sense of the full picture? They may only be seeing a particular slice.
Yeah. Well, I think one is the intention of the deliverer. Do you have the desire to give the full picture, or are the incentives such that you would actually prefer a grotesque version of it? Like, so we have to remove those incentives. Yeah. But if my genuine incentives are to get you the full picture, I think we have a lot of knowledge on what to do. I'll give you an example. Michael Porter is one of the famous professors at HBS in strategy, and Nithin Noria was our former dean, and two amazing scholars. Nithin was writing his first paper ever with Michael Porter. And Nithin has written so many papers, really prolific. And they were on draft 21. And Nithin has never wrote a paper that had more than 3 drafts. They worked on 21, and then they got to 22 and 23. And he was finally like, Mike, how do you know when we're going to be done? You lost me teens ago. And Mike looked at him and said, we're done when it's obvious. I think the same is true here. How do we know? Our job is to understand deeply so that we can describe simply. And what happens is the people who know well use it as a way to describe it in such detailed way that they're only talking to their 5 people that understand it. Mm-hmm. And then we have people who don't understand it well and are describing it simply, and they're adding no nutritional value. So the real step we have is we have to be like Mike. We have to understand deeply so that we can describe simply. And then I think we can make a lot of progress.
Yeah, that's very sound. I'm looking at the questions in the chat, and a couple of people have raised the question about how do you, in an organization that doesn't necessarily have a 360 process for providing feedback up and down in the organization, or the organization isn't the most receptive at handling bad news, how do you engage people in that environment to ensure that trust is built and that when there is bad news, it's being shared?
Yeah, so I think that it's what happens before the bad news is shared is important. So once the bad news happens, you're either going to share it well or not based on the pre-existing conditions of your culture. So what I'm doing right now is preparing for when the bad news is shared. So there's a couple of things. The first one is we have to become adept at giving and receiving feedback, even when it's not bad news. So for example, as someone who holds operational improvement in as much reverence as you do, I know that if I wanted to help someone improve, the quickest way to do it is for me to point out what they're doing well in enough specificity so they know to do more of it tomorrow. So if I'm doing 100 things and you point out the 10 that I'm doing well, I don't know which 10, I just know it went well. And you gave me sincere and specific positive reinforcement on that, I'm going to accelerate a lot. Now, when you're doing that, you can every once in a while also give me constructive advice. And that is, instead of doing more of this, do this differently. But that has to be on a foundation of you already see me. We can think of the bad news as the constructive advice that comes out of the blue. If we don't have a foundation of communicating in a way where there's feedback, everybody's going to fall into a defensive crouch. I don't believe you see me. I think, I don't know what your motives are. So what we should constantly be doing is oiling the machinery of giving and receiving feedback. And then there's not going to be this shoot the messenger or keep it to yourself. So that would be my reaction.
I want to pick up on your operations management piece because we do connect on that. When you were describing the opportunity for positive feedback, and I'll add to that the idea of self-determination. One of my favorite cases is NUMMI, the New United Motor Manufacturing Inc., the joint venture between GM and Toyota, where you take one of the worst plants in the GM system, and worst, I mean productivity, quality, employee relations, everything dimension, and you can hire most of the exact same people and turn around with the highest quality production in the GM system. And when I kind of go to root cause and try and understand what's going on, a huge part of it is self-determination, the idea of continuous improvement, but continuous improvement sponsored by those that are actually turning the wrench and doing the work, as opposed to someone coming from up on high. So I really see that.
No, and it's great, Mark. And, from that, like, it wasn't new people, it wasn't new technology, some new process, and that's exactly what we saw at Uber when we turned it around. It's what we saw at Riot Games. It's in every large scale change, it's the same people. It's usually like 20 or so out of 13,000 have to go. It's the same people without new technology, and we can have dramatic turnaround. So we can make NUMMI commonplace, is what my experience is.
Yeah, there are a lot of organizations that need to head in that direction. Yeah. I'm curious, one other kind of foundational aspect that I've seen important is core values.
Yeah.
And I want to differentiate that from mission and vision, which are mutable. Yeah. They change as the world around you changes, but core values kind of stay the same. And I'm thinking in particular of a transportation company, a railroad, and it had a set of 5 core values: right results, right ways, employee engagement and education, supporting communities and the environment, things like that. And those were immutable. And much to my amazement, the organization was able to hold those through different management transitions. Have you observed core values as a foundational element to this, the idea of really building a trust, thriving organization?
Yeah, although I will tell you that even core values can become weaponized. Okay. So, and when a core value becomes weaponized, the lesson I have learned the hard way is it's not a matter of explaining what you meant it to be. Once it's weaponized, maybe it was used in a song, it's gone, and you just got to let it go. Good news, if we brought a team together and tried to come up with new core values, you'll probably have 70% of the old and 30% that are just more appropriate for our context. I found one organization that default to trust was a core value, and it became weaponized. And so it was meant that we should give each other the benefit of the doubt. But Mark, if you were senior to me and I came to you and I just kept asking you questions about something, I was like, but wait, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. At some point you'd become exasperated and say, look, Francis, default to trust. So you would bastardize the use of the core value. If that happens too often, if you're using it for self-serving reasons instead of, and that's through the organization, we got to liberate that core value and come up with new ones. So I find them to also be a living document, although 60 or 70% will be able to preserve.
The issue of a trusting organization ties to one of the questions we got, which was moving from the organization to the individual. What happens when an individual is always trusting? And does that create a challenge? And should the person be a little more skeptical about how they view information and the trustworthiness of their entity?
Yeah, I do in all candor, I do most of my work on how to earn trust. And that is by getting people to believe in your authenticity, logic, and empathy. But I know people who are naively trusting And when I look at it, I'm like, wow, which one are you overemphasizing?
Hmm.
And they'll be overemphasizing one. And so you could introduce this framework to them, but I'm really leaving that work to someone else. I'm on the earn it, not on the giving it.
Got it. Got it. We got an interesting question also about the role of top management in creating that trust environment. And the question goes something, is it 100% necessary to make a trusting organization? What's your take on that?
Well, I'm going to answer a question within it, and then you tell me if I still have to answer that question.
Okay.
The largest obstacle to rebuilding trust in an organization, it's neither the top management nor the front line. Usually the top management gets it, usually the front line gets it. But there is a turf protecting middle. So it's the middle of the organization that has put their needs above the organization's needs. And so what they really care about is whatever happens, as long as I get to have this many direct reports, and whatever happens, that my department is in this much esteem. So there's this turf protecting middle that there is no logic or empathy. And frankly, you can misplace your authenticity. So in my experience, particularly over the last couple of years, it's been the middle of organizations that have been the ones that are holding it back. You know, the top of the organization, they might get it. They might get it because their kids got it. They might get it because their board got it.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of messages going at the tops of organizations, and the front line is living it. They get it. In fact, they're the first people in the organization to get it. So I find it's the middle to be the place that I have found a little bit, and surprisingly, a little bit more challenging. Having said that, what do you do when the top of the organization doesn't get it? I think if at the top of the organization, if we go back, Mark, to people learn differently. If it's a data-driven top of the organization, do a small pilot where you showed the presence of trust, made the numbers go up. If it's an emotional person, do a small pilot where the sentiment of employee satisfaction went up. Like, do get some evidence based for whether it's the right side or the left side of their brain, and then ask permission to do larger and larger, pilots with it.
I think that's a great response for that individual. One of the areas that I find intriguing about this is the role of regulation. We should conceptually have every organization doing what you've described and how you've described it to a T. But we know there are cases where that doesn't necessarily happen. And so there have been times when we've turned to regulation to try and instill trust. But there is an interesting middle ground. And the interesting middle ground is industry self-regulation, where the industry itself says, we don't want someone coming in over the top to tell us what to do. There may be some challenges we face that individually we may not all be as trustworthy as we should be. And so as a group, for the collective benefit, we are going to industry self-regulate. And I can look at lawyers as an example of that. I can look at some of the financial industry as an example of that. And I can look at lobbying as an example where that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
What's your view on the role of industry self-regulation as a way of making a collective trust environment?
So a place where
maybe some kind of holdouts on the side.
So, I'm intrigued by what we're observing in the sustainability movement when it's pre-loads of regulation. And so there is this voluntary self-disclosure, and there's beautiful work done on the benefits of and the burdens of that. But when a collection of organizations, when an industry comes together and does the voluntary self-disclosure, you can imagine that they're preventing future regulation, and they probably know what needs to be disclosed more than the regulators were. Mm-hmm. So I believe that it can be possible. Having said that, I have just seen too many cases. I mean, when I went to Uber, one of the reasons I wanted to go there was that I found that cabs were legal thievery. In Boston, I had to go to an inconvenient place. I got not very good service, sitting in a not very comfortable car, and charging a rate that no competition could take care of. It was even worse in New York. And so there are times when regulation transcends its purpose for the greater good.
Yep.
And when it does, sometimes competition is what's needed to break through it. And then when competition transcends the greater good, then sometimes it's what regulation. But by and large, I'm pro-regulation as long as the regulators do not have an ulterior motive. I'm anti-regulation when they've been funded by like 2 or 3 main people, and they're really trying to make it not competitive for the benefit of a few.
It's funny you should say that because, of course, railroads were the first industry to be regulated by the ICC in the 1880s. And when we look back at what the rationale was, it was not to protect the consumer by any stretch of the imagination. It was to protect the participants in the industry from killing each other, largely. If we zip forward, though, in the transportation space, the other issue that comes with regulation is regulatory capture. And certainly when we look at the Boeing 737 MAX and the investigations that seem to be underway there is a real risk of that as well. And so, the trust really rides in both directions. It is trust of the organization that is being regulated, but it is also trust of the regulator themselves and their obligations to be trustworthy. And
I think there's a lot of industry dynamics because we do have to protect people. If you put people in situations where they have to have such self-control to overcome it, I don't want to build a system on that. So I want to make sure that we're not tempting the regulators with too much. But by and large, regulators were super helpful to Uber in Uber's cultural turnaround. Regulators in the hands of public servants that are not beholden to a few people are magnificent. It's the beholden part that it's not clear, it's not more harm than good.
One tool that has been used as an intermediary level between the organization itself resolving the problem and a regulator coming in over the top have been whistleblowers. We've seen them throughout both of our careers, periodically coming forward. As I've observed, it is a very hard road to hoe, to take on that responsibility. Yeah. How do you see whistleblowing playing into kind of our creation of trusting environments?
Yeah, so there's this movement in trust tech, which is taking whistleblowing, but instead of I'm going to blow the whistle on, one of the largest companies in the world, which is what we hear about it, but rather I'm going to surface problems if they occur. So there's this company that I've been involved in advising since its inception called Vault Technologies. And what they have done is said, every company has an anonymous hotline in these things, but they don't work all that well in surfacing problems. And what the tragedy is, the reason we need whistleblowers is because these things are happening again and again and again, and no one knows. And from our operations brains, that makes us crazy. If we could have solved it once, it would have saved. And that's from the efficiency and also the humanity. It's horrible. So they came up with a novel idea, which is they, as a third-party provider, will let you download onto your phone Vault Technologies if your company signs up for it. And what I can do is if I observe some malfeasance, I can take a picture of it. I can open the Vault app and I can take a picture of it. I can write some notes and I don't have to send it in yet. And I might decide I'm going to wait a little while and I'm going to go, but it got a timestamp on it. And so I'm able to essentially collect evidence along the way. And let's say it's not malfeasance. Let's say it's something horrible like sexual harassment.
Mhm.
And it happened and it's 2 a.m. and I don't want to call an anonymous hotline. And it gives me some guided questions to ask and I take some photos. But then, and this happens to a lot of people who are the victims of sexual harassment, you've collected the evidence and then you're like, okay, but wait a minute. Do I want to be the person who ruins so-and-so's career? It's unbelievable, but that's like the empathy soars for these people. And they're like, I don't want to be the person. But then the next thought is, but I don't want to be the person who permits them to be a serial perpetrator.
Right.
Well, Vault Technology came up with a really clever solution, and I'm using them as an example of we need creativity to solve these problems. They have this thing called Go Together, which is I can submit mine, but it will never be seen unless an identical claim is made by someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ruining anybody's career, and I'm stopping it from being a perpetrator. That's one example of doing it. I think whistleblowing, I think we have to think, because right now it's Herculean, and the people who do it are, I think we have to think, let's get to the root. Let's go down to the moments of truth from the earlier. Let's get to the root and let's get the younger generation to come up with really cool ways that gets at the real issue way before it becomes a big, big deal.
For our as we start to wrap up, there's one question that was a bit of a theme in some of the questions, which was, instead of having to rebuild trust, how do we build it from the get-go?
Yeah.
So avoid the failure that needs to rebuild. How do you do that? And when I think about that, my first response is having an organization in which negative information is accepted, and in fact, maybe even embraced. One of the observations I've made, and I want to tie it to your new generation that you were just referring to, the whole idea of design thinking as a way of, we're going to try things, minimum viable, we're going to fail fast, and we're not going to get beaten up for a failure. We're actually going to be told, okay, what did you learn from it? Let's move on. Do you think this has a role for us as a way of kind of making that foundation stronger?
Yeah. And so I would say that on the logic side, and I think IDEO might have been the one that famously had the fail fast so you can succeed sooner. And they're really the source of a lot of this design thinking. Mm-hmm. And I think it's exactly right that, and if we're not talking about what did you learn from failure, if your answer is nothing, then okay, then I guess I don't need you to be in this meeting. Let's go to the next person. But so that it encourages, and it's not reckless failure. Nobody's going to go doing that, but that we're doing it. And I think your point is, oh my gosh, did it really take us a year to learn that? So our postmortem is, how could we have learned that? We had to learn it by doing. How could we have learned it in 4 weeks instead of 12 months? And then that gets to be super duper creative. And I do think it's a humility that some things have to be learned by doing. And I think bringing that with the creativity, you could imagine that Vault Technologies, I don't think they used IDEO, but you could imagine it's IDEO-esque with design thinking and getting to it. So, and it's fueled by the next generation, just makes me very, very optimistic.
Well, optimistic is right, as we should wrap things up. We should always end on a positive note. Yeah. Frances, it's been wonderful having this conversation and to get to see you and hear your perspectives. Jonathan, let me hand it back to you and let you wrap us up.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Frances. Thanks to all of you who have joined us today. We hope you'll join us for more signature events and HILT conference follow-on events. These include, and this is not unrelated, ethical reasoning for computer scientists this Wednesday at noon. And then next Wednesday, the 17th at 5 p.m., join Paul Farmer and Arthur Kleinman for Connecting Scholarship with Action. Information on upcoming events, as well as recordings of past ones, can be found at vpal.harvard.edu/vpal-events.